The Bermuda Triangle has captured imaginations with stories of vanished planes and ships, but now a new scientific theory claims to finally have the answer.
The Bermuda Triangle covers about 500,000 square miles of the Atlantic Ocean, between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico.
A drone finally reached the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle, and what it recorded stunned everyone. It wasn't the kind of discovery people expected. There were no shipwrecks, no scattered debris, no remains of the countless vessels said to have disappeared there. Instead, deep beneath the ocean surface, nearly 700 meters down, the cameras revealed something far more mysterious. Enormous stone blocks, perfectly shaped and aligned in long rows, resting in complete darkness on the seafloor, in a place where no human technology should have ever been able to build anything. Everyone has heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but the truth is, nobody really knows what's happening there. The footage that shocked the world didn't come from a conspiracy video or some blurry internet clip. It came from a real deep-sea expedition funded through an official government contract carried out by trained marine engineers using professional exploration equipment. This wasn't rumor or secondhand storytelling. It was high-definition video supported by sonar scans captured during a licensed commercial mission. And the moment the images appeared on the monitors, the entire control room fell silent, because what they were seeing on the ocean floor made no sense. It seemed to break every known rule of ocean geology. Massive formations sitting deep beneath the sea in a way that should not have been possible. Even stranger, no one ever returned to fully explain what was found there. It all began in 2001, when Paulina Zalitsky's company, Advanced Digital Communications, received permission from the Cuban government to survey the seabed in search of old Spanish shipwrecks, lost cargo, gold, silver, and other treasures believed to have sunk centuries ago. It was supposed to be routine work. Her crew was experienced, the technology was state-of-the-art, and nobody aboard expected anything more than weeks of ordinary underwater scanning. But the ocean had something else waiting for them. The side-scan sonar system worked by sending sound waves down to the seafloor and measuring what bounced back. Soft mud absorbed the sound and appeared dark on the screen. Solid rock reflected it brightly, but usually in rough, uneven patterns. That's what natural geology looks like after millions of years of chaos. Random, broken, irregular shapes. After staring at those patterns for hours, most of it becomes background noise, which is why the next signal immediately caught everyone's attention. Something on the monitor looked completely different. What Zalitsky's team saw did not match anything they had encountered before. Bright sonar returns forming straight parallel lines, evenly spaced with sharp angles that looked almost intentional. It wasn't the scattered remains of a shipwreck or the jagged outline of a reef. This looked organized, precise, deliberate. A level of order that simply should not exist at the bottom of the ocean. The lead sonar technician, a veteran marine engineer with years of experience studying the Caribbean seafloor, thought it had to be an error. He reran the scan from another angle. The shapes were still there. He adjusted the sonar gain, changed the frequency settings, and went through every calibration method he knew to rule out equipment problems. Nothing changed. The patterns remained perfectly visible. Finally, he leaned back from the console, looked at Zalitsky, and told her the system was working exactly as it should. Whatever the sonar was detecting was real. Solid structures were sitting on the ocean floor. And then came the detail that unsettled everyone even more. The sonar showed shadows behind the shapes. At first, that detail might not sound important, but for people who work with sonar data every day, it changes everything. Shadows only appear when something rises above the surrounding ground. Flat seabeds do not create shadows. Buried debris does not create shadows. Thin layers of rock lying level with the ocean floor do not create shadows. Whatever the sonar was detecting had height, mass, and clearly defined edges. It was standing on the seafloor the way a structure stands on land. Zalitsky immediately ordered the ship to maintain its position. Her team conducted 5 additional scans over the same area, each time approaching from different directions while changing speed and scan depth to rule out errors. Every pass returned the exact same result. 5 scans, 5 identical readings, and none of them matched anything in the records. The formations did not resemble a shipwreck, a coral reef, or any known geological structure in the region. The crew checked every database available to them, comparing the images against known ocean floor patterns across the Caribbean. Nothing came close. What makes this even more remarkable is that Paulina Zalitsky was not someone chasing myths or conspiracy theories. She was a trained marine engineer with years of experience leading deep-sea expeditions. When she looked at the sonar data, she was not imagining things or searching for legends. She was studying what the instruments were clearly showing her. And according to those instruments, something existed on the ocean floor that, by every accepted understanding of ocean geology, should not have been there at all. The team marked the coordinates carefully. Then they made a decision that changed the entire mission. The search for shipwrecks was over. The gold no longer mattered. They were going to send a camera to the bottom of the ocean and finally see the mystery with their own eyes. And if you're the kind of person who wants to know what they discovered down there, make sure you subscribe now, because this story is about to go somewhere nobody expected. 700 meters below the surface is a completely different world. Sending a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, to that depth is not a simple task. You cannot just lower a camera into the water and hope for the best. At 700 meters, the pressure is more than 70 times greater than at sea level, strong enough to crush any machine that is not specially built to survive it. Sunlight disappears hundreds of meters above. Down there, the water is freezing cold, completely black, and almost perfectly silent. One damaged cable, one failed seal, one electrical problem, and the ROV is lost forever. If it goes down, it simply becomes another object resting on the ocean floor, impossible to recover. There are no easy rescue missions at that depth. No second attempts. Everything has to work perfectly the first time. Zalitsky's crew prepared the ROV with extreme care, fully aware of what was at risk. They inspected the reinforced cable section by section. They tested the powerful floodlights, the only source of visibility in a place untouched by natural light for millions of years. The cameras were calibrated, the live video connection was checked, and every onboard system went through repeated diagnostics. Only after every test came back clear did they begin lowering it into the water. The cable slowly unrolled into the sea. During the first 50 meters, faint sunlight still filtered through the water, and small fish drifted calmly past the camera lens, barely noticing the glowing machine descending beside them. As it went deeper, the water became so dense that it felt like it was pressing against the camera itself, as if the lens was facing an invisible wall. The ROV's floodlights quickly became the only source of reality in every direction, a small cone of artificial white cutting through an endless black void. Tiny particles drifted through the beam like slow-motion snow, disturbed by the vehicle's descent through the water column. The depth readings kept climbing, 300 meters, 400, 500. Up on the surface, the control room was completely silent. No conversation, no movement, just focused eyes locked on the screens. The only sounds were the low hum of electronics and the steady clicking of the winch cable feeding more line into the deep. At around 680 meters, something began to appear at the very edge of the lights, the seafloor slowly rising into view. But what came onto the screen was nothing they had prepared for. It wasn't mud. It wasn't scattered rock. It wasn't the broken, chaotic landscape they had seen on countless other deep-sea missions over the years. Instead, large flat surfaces filled the frame. The ROV moved closer and the shapes became clearer. Sharp edges, straight lines, massive rectangular blocks placed neatly beside one another with smooth faces and precise corners that looked almost engineered rather than natural. Some were several meters across. Their surfaces were surprisingly clean. Not heavily eroded, not buried under thick layers of silt, not broken apart by time, pressure, or ocean currents. At 700 meters deep, where constant sediment fall should have buried everything over time, these structures looked almost untouched, as if they had been placed there very recently. Later, Zalitsky would describe that moment simply. The control room went completely silent. Not quiet, completely silent. Her sonar technician sat motionless at his station, one hand still resting on the controls as if he had forgotten to move. Another crew member held the edge of the console so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Someone else stepped back from the monitor, almost instinctively, as if what they were seeing might somehow reach out of the screen. Because there was no doubt in that room anymore. Whatever they were looking at did not belong there. Not at that depth, not in that ocean, and not anywhere in the known geological record. And every person understood that truth at the exact same moment. The kind of discovery nobody could explain. And here's where it gets even stranger. When the footage was later reviewed frame by frame, the mystery didn't fade. It only grew. The structures were not random at all. They weren't scattered or broken apart. Instead, they formed long, deliberate rows with consistent spacing and repeating geometric patterns spread across a large area of the seafloor. But nature doesn't behave like that. Ocean currents scatter debris unpredictably. Geological pressure fractures rock in irregular ways. Volcanic activity produces chaotic, uneven formations. Across all known ocean mapping history, nothing natural has ever shown this level of clean geometric order at any depth. And there was something else that made it even harder to explain. The material itself didn't match the surrounding environment. The seafloor in the western Cuban region is mostly limestone, a soft, porous rock formed from compressed marine life over millions of years. It's fragile in geological terms. It erodes, cracks, and dissolves relatively easily under constant deep-sea pressure and movement. But the blocks recorded by the ROV didn't look like ordinary seabed material at all. They appeared dense, solid, and unusually smooth, with a surface texture far more consistent with granite or another hard igneous rock. Granite is not something that forms easily. It develops under extreme heat and pressure deep inside the Earth's crust. Even with modern machinery, it is extremely difficult to cut, shape, or precisely form. So finding what looked like granite blocks arranged in clean geometric rows on a limestone seabed was like discovering a steel beam deep in the middle of a forest. It simply didn't belong there. It didn't match anything around it, and it didn't make sense as a natural formation. Dr. Manuel Iturralde Vinent, one of Cuba's most respected geologists and a senior researcher at the National Museum of Natural History in Havana, personally reviewed the sonar data and underwater footage. His response was measured, but telling. He confirmed that the formations did not correspond to any known natural geological process in that region. The regular shapes, the apparent composition of the material, and the unusual level of preservation at that depth were, in his words, very unusual and worthy of serious scientific investigation. However, he stopped short of saying they were man-made, and that hesitation spoke volumes. Because Iturralde Vinent wasn't claiming there was a natural explanation. He was acknowledging that if there wasn't, the implications would be so significant that no scientist was willing to make a definitive public claim too quickly. Think about that for a moment. One of Cuba's leading geologists looked at the evidence, admitted it couldn't be explained through known natural processes, and still chose not to define exactly what it was. But there was another layer to the mystery that made everything even harder to explain. At 700 meters deep, fine sediment is constantly falling through the water column above, slowly settling on everything below. Tiny particles of organic material, fine silt, and microscopic debris drift down through the water like invisible snow, not just for days or years, but for centuries and millennia. Over long periods of time, this constant settling process slowly buries almost everything on the ocean floor beneath thick layers of sediment. Even shipwrecks that are only a few hundred years old are often completely covered, hidden from view, and detectable only through sonar or specialized imaging. But what Zalitsky's team observed didn't match that pattern. Many of the structures were fully exposed. Their edges were still crisp and well-defined. Their surfaces looked unusually clean, not eroded or buried under mud and sediment as one would expect at that depth and age. That left only two realistic possibilities, neither of which was easy to accept. Either the structures were far younger than their depth implied, which makes no sense geologically given the immense timescales required for land to subside to 700 meters in that region. Or something about this specific area of the seafloor was preventing normal sediment from accumulating, which also has no clear or satisfying explanation in current geological science. Every attempt to explain it seemed to create a new contradiction. Every answer led to another unanswered question. And despite careful review, neither Zalitsky nor Dr. Manuel Iturralde Vinant, nor anyone else who examined the data, could produce a single theory that accounted for all the observations at once. And that's where the timeline problem becomes unavoidable. Because if these formations were not created by any known natural process, then the only remaining explanation is that they were made by something or someone. And that possibility forces a timeline that clashes directly with accepted views of human history. At depths like this, land does not sink 700 meters in just a few centuries. It doesn't even happen over a few thousand years. Some geological models go even further, depending on how tectonic activity and plate boundary movements are interpreted in that region. If those models are even partly correct, the timeline pushes the possible origin of these formations back to a period when, according to established archaeology, humanity was still made up of small, mobile groups of hunter-gatherers. No cities, no stone quarries, no organized workforce, no engineering knowledge capable of cutting massive blocks of stone, transporting them, and placing them in precise geometric arrangements across a large area. But here's the key point. The seafloor doesn't adjust itself to human expectations. The evidence is simply there, sitting 700 meters below the surface in complete darkness, waiting for an explanation. Dr. Greg Little, an archaeologist and researcher who has studied multiple underwater anomalies across the Caribbean basin, reviewed the available Zalitsky expedition data and publicly stated that the formations deserved serious, fully funded scientific investigation. He emphasized that the scale, regularity, and apparent material composition were extremely difficult to align with any known natural process. He even suggested the possibility that the structures could be man-made. But when asked directly, there was a pause, a hesitation that said as much as the answer itself. Because if they were man-made, it would force a complete reassessment of how far back organized human civilization actually goes. On the other side of the discussion, skeptics offer alternative explanations, and those arguments are important too. Some geologists point to a process known as jointing, where volcanic or tectonic stress causes rock to fracture along relatively regular planes. In certain conditions, this can produce shapes that appear surprisingly geometric, especially when viewed through sonar data or limited imaging. Dr. Robert Ballard, the renowned ocean explorer who discovered the wreck of the Titanic, has often emphasized that the deep ocean is full of formations that can look artificial at first glance, but are later proven to be entirely natural upon closer inspection. His position has consistently been that extraordinary claims about underwater structures require extraordinary physical proof, physical samples, isotopic analysis, and core drilling. And none of that has ever been done at the Cuban site. And that is the central issue. Without a return expedition, without physical evidence, without direct geological sampling, the site remains suspended in uncertainty, neither confirmed nor explained. Just there. And then there is one final theory, the most controversial of all, but also the one that some argue fits the physical observations most closely. Some researchers have suggested that the Caribbean plate lies in one of the most geologically active and unstable regions on Earth. Over its long history, the area has experienced major tectonic shifts, including sudden collapses of coastal shelves and violent underwater movements that reshaped entire sections of seabed. In theory, if a catastrophic event, such as a megathrust earthquake or a rapid plate boundary failure, had caused an entire coastal landmass to drop into the ocean almost instantly, it could explain many of the strange observations. It would account for the preservation of the structures, the lack of heavy sediment buildup, and the unusually fresh appearance of surfaces that should have been buried and eroded over vast periods of time. A sudden, violent submersion could have sealed the site like a natural time capsule, locking it away in deep, cold darkness before normal ocean processes had time to destroy or bury it. It remains speculative. It is dramatic. But importantly, it is not physically impossible. And among all the theories proposed, it is the only one that doesn't require ignoring large parts of the available evidence. Then comes the silence. Because the most troubling part of this entire story isn't what was discovered. It's what happened afterward. Nothing. Zalitsky attempted to organize a return expedition. She contacted universities, research institutes, and oceanographic organizations, anyone with the resources, funding, and equipment needed for a proper deep-sea investigation. She had everything: coordinates, sonar scans, ROV footage, and professionally recorded data from a licensed scientific operation. This wasn't rumor or speculation. It was documented evidence gathered with serious instruments and archived for further study. But the response was mostly silence. The Cuban authorities, dealing with their own priorities, did not move the project forward. Major universities in the United States and Europe did not step in. No major oceanographic institution committed a vessel, funding, or a research team to revisit the site. What may be one of the most intriguing underwater anomalies ever recorded in the Caribbean was essentially filed away and left untouched. Zalitsky continued pushing for years. She gave interviews, presented her findings, and repeatedly argued that the site deserved proper scientific investigation. And each time, the answers were the same: interesting, noteworthy, but ultimately, no funding available. Think about that for a moment. We live in a world where private companies send tourists to the Titanic, where billions are spent exploring distant planets with robotic probes, and where entire missions are dedicated to mapping worlds millions of kilometers away. Yet a verified underwater anomaly, located less than a kilometer beneath an ocean we've navigated for centuries, has never received a dedicated return expedition. The data still exists, the footage is real, the coordinates are known, and the site remains exactly where it was found, 700 meters below the surface of one of the most mysterious and feared regions of ocean on Earth. Untouched, unvisited, and still unexplained. We've sent rovers to Mars. We've imaged black holes billions of light years away. We've mapped the moon's surface in incredible detail. But these structures, in our own ocean, remain uninvestigated at the level they deserve. And that silence says more than any theory ever could. Whether those formations were shaped by unknown geological forces or by something history has lost track of entirely, one fact remains: the ocean doesn't easily give up its secrets. And this one is still down there, locked beneath 700 meters of darkness, waiting for someone willing to go back and finally find out the truth. So what do you think? Is this purely geology at work or something more unusual? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know your perspective. And if this story caught your attention, there are more like it coming soon. Until next time.